Hi everyone, my name is Herkeph and welcome back to my incredibly stupid hardcore world where I am only allowed to use wooden tools and leather armor. In today's episode, we're starting things off by fighting off some Jehovah's Witnesses from my doorstep, but never mind them. In last week's episode, we started gathering materials that we'll need for our biggest project yet, which is my new base. However, since I am a proper masochist, I've decided that we're going to be building a futuristic base, and with said futuristic theme. I've also picked out a block palette that is rather annoying to obtain in survival mode, which is an aspect that I was too lazy to consider earlier. But nonetheless, in our block palette that I have picked out for us, our main light source will be FROGLIGHTs, which is only obtainable by having frogs eat magma cubes. And depending on what colour frog ate the magma cube, a different colour FROGLIGHT will plop into existence in a very magical fashion. And since I am a completionist, I figured that we will want to be able to farm all colours, which will make my life significantly harder and provide a rather questionable upside. So in order to get the process started in getting all of the FROGLIGHTs, I started force feeding the crusty cadaver of a slime to some unsuspecting frogs, who then rewarded me by handing me their offspring. However, said offspring will actually need to hatch in order for me to be able to kidnap them, so I decided to spend my time jumping around in a swamp. I dedicated myself to this incredibly productive task until the frog spawn eventually hatched. I then quickly placed a couple babies in the buckets I had prepared and flew off. I then decided to explore for a bit in order to find all different temperature biomes. In order to obtain all of the frog variants and therefore all FROGLIGHT variants, we're going to have to raise the frogs in all different temperatures. And after a not very long time at all, I managed to find myself a cold biome, which was the last temperature we were looking for, as we had already found a mesa, which counts as a warm biome. However, soon after I had found a cold biome, I stumbled upon a pillager outpost, which actually had a few carved pumpkins, which I always have time to steal. I then made my way back home and got to making the preparations to start building the FROGLIGHT farm. So I gathered up all of the materials that we would need and placed down my kidnapping victims in my basement. I then flew off in the nether to find a basalt delta and started constructing the FROGLIGHT farm, like the very productive young man that I am. And once the farm was pretty much done, I started raising some frogs in my basement, which counted as a normal biome, giving us the orange variety of frog. I then put all of the frogs on leads and shoved them into the nether. I then dragged them all the way to the farm that we had constructed, which allowed me to tick off the first frog variety that we needed. I then wasted no time at all and flew straight to the mesa biome that we had used to get terracotta in our previous episode and prepared an area for our precious frogs. Once all of the warm frogs had been successfully raised, I repeated the exact same process where I brought all of the frogs to the farm. I then checked off the warm frogs, leaving only the cold frogs that I still had to sort out. And before long, I had raised the cold frogs as well, and did the exact same thing as before. And once we had all of the frog varieties in the killing chamber, I continued building the rest of the farm. And once the farm was completely up and running, I came to the realization that I still didn't have a decent source of food even though we are 5 episodes into this world, so I decided to set up 4 farmers and leveled them up so that we could have a source of golden carrots. And now that I am thinking about it, I'm not entirely sure why I hadn't done this significantly earlier. as it would have saved a lot of time and been rather convenient to actually have food. Anyways, now that we finally had food sorted, I started collecting even more sand, as we are going to need an absolutely ridiculous amount of white concrete to build our base. And once we had collected a decent amount of sand, I got to the incredibly thrilling and engaging task of crafting the white concrete powder as well as the cyan terracotta. And after a very long time of purely crafting, I flew off to the middle of the ocean to finally start construction of my mega base. However, shortly after starting the construction, I ran into yet another issue. In order to actually progress with the circle that I had started, I am going to need hardened concrete, and all I had at this point was concrete powder, so I flew over to my starter house and picked up some redstone stuff. Once the smart people stuff had successfully been acquired, I flew over to my mob farm and decided that it would be the ideal spot to build my concrete converter. My reasoning was that the concrete converter was going to require a lot of TNT, meaning I'd need a lot of gunpowder, so if I built the concrete converter in range of the mob farm, I'd have less downtime. I was rather proud of the thinking that I did there, as I tend to not think very much. I was in fact so proud that I completely threw myself off and realized that I had no idea what I was doing. So I then went on to improvise a concrete converter, which failed completely. So I decided to jump into a creative testing world. The idea I had was that I'd use two observers facing each other, which would cause them to spam redstone outputs. I would then have said redstone output feed into a piston, which would push the concrete towards the TNT and explode it. At the same time, the redstone signal would also feed into a dropper that would replenish the concrete powder that I was placing. That way I'd be able to be completely AFK whilst running the converter. However, what I completely forgot to account for was that the TNT couldn't keep up with the piston pushing the concrete, meaning that the dropper would replenish my concrete powder significantly faster than I was able to place it. So I had to make a few adjustments in order to get it to work. However, once I had gotten it to work, I decided to build it somewhere else. I am not entirely sure why I decided to do that, as I had actually put a lot of thought into the placement of it. So basically, I had a smart idea and decided to completely ignore it. But nevertheless, I did manage to get the concrete converter to work and went to AFK. I then got back to some major stonks, which came in the form of completely hardened concrete. I then got back to the incredibly thrilling and engaging task of building a circle in the middle of the ocean. Now that the circle is done, my plan is to fill in the circle with dirt to basically make a man-made island, but futuristic. But I think that is all that we have time for in this week's episode. So there we have it, the 5th episode of my incredibly stupid hardcore world. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you in the next one, where we will continue building our mega base.